Hello, welcome to the Courtauld Conservation Department Open Day. I'm Aviva Bernstock. I'm a professor in the Department of Conservation and Technology, which is the easel paintings part of the Conservation Department.
And I'm Pippa Balch, and I'm a senior lecturer in the Conservation Department easel paintings.
I'm Pia Gottscheller. I'm also a senior lecturer in easels.
I'm Claire Richardson. I'm a lecturer in the department as well.
There's Maureen Cross, who seems to be muted, and she's also a senior lecturer in the department. So I'm going to begin by giving you a sort of overview of the course, the 3-year course, and then my colleagues will be taking the stage and talking a bit about special elements of the course as we go through. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk about the conservation of easel paintings, which is a 3-year full-time professional education in conservation. Next slide. So this is the Department of Conservation at Vernon Square, where you can see students involved in a range of tasks in practical conservation and also microscopy, which is part of the course. Next slide, please. And this is the front of the building at Vernon Square, which is our temporary location. It may be temporary for a couple more years before we move back to Somerset House. And this is a very nice summery photo, or even spring-like photo of the front of it with the square in front. It's a big building and we have very nice accommodation for conservation on one floor. And of course, the area is a very exciting area. So yes, well, I was going to talk a bit about this exciting area, but you'll discover it for yourself if you come in the centre of London in King's Cross. So this is the Department of Conservation, where there are 2 branches, easel paintings and wall paintings. And in fact, the Institute was established in 1932, and the department, which was then a technology department, was established 2 years later. And I've showed you a historical photo of one of the former heads of department looking through a very old looking microscope at a painting from the Courtauld gallery. And then on the lower right, you can see a rather more modern piece of equipment and a student doing something quite similar, looking at the back of a canvas painting. And in fact, the education in conservation started in 1974 officially. And then it developed into the 3-year course in 1976, and it's still running as a 3-year course. And then wall painting conservation, which is a separate course, but there are some overlaps, started in 1985 and is also continuing. Next slide, please. So what we call is the division really between the 2 courses, even with some overlaps, is the PG Diploma, the Postgraduate Diploma in the Conservation of Easel Paintings, which are movable, and then the Conservation of Wall Paintings, which is a master's course in wall paintings, which of course can't be moved. Next slide. And this is a kind of strange photograph, or it's a photograph of what we might look like, one of our studios, typical studios, when we move back to Somerset House quite soon, or within 1 or 2 years, and we'll have lovely new resources and facilities there. Next slide. And of course, we'll be right next door to the Courtauld Gallery, which is a fantastic gallery, which has not only Samuel Courtauld and the Courtauld family's collection of Impressionist and post-Impressionist paintings, but other bequests of older paintings mainly, and some modern paintings. And we, in fact, are the department that are responsible for the conservation of those paintings, together with the gallery conservator of paintings and also of works on paper. It's a great resource to have. Right next door to us, back at Somerset House. Next slide. So first of all, a 3-year full-time postgraduate diploma in the conservation easel painting. So I'll give a little overview followed by special elements of the course. Then there'll be student stories. And at the end, there'll be questions. Please ask questions in the chat, which we're really happy to answer. So next slide. So the first year of the course, about half the time is spent in lectures and seminars learning theory, and half the time is spent in the studio doing practical work of different kinds. Next slide. The practical work on paintings, and this is quite a sort of typical feature of our course, starts really in the first year. In the second semester of the first year, you will find yourself, if you come on the course, working on paintings from start to finish. That will involve doing all the diagnostic work and technical examination, and also carrying out the treatment and documentation of what you do. Next slide. Documentation and technical examination is quite a big part of the course. So students on the course will do their own microscopy and use technical images like X-rays and infrared reflectography, looking at paint samples and understanding how pictures are made and their condition as part of what's done as in the life of a conservator. So next slide. In the second year, students are about 4/5 of their time in the studio doing conservation work and documentation, technical study, but they also have one strand, typically 1 day a week, of professional context, which could involve lectures and seminars and visits to professional places and organizations. Next slide. Can't quite see the top, but this is an example of the kind of workshop that students can be doing on a special element of the course, like how to clean paintings using alternative methods. And there are several of these, and also visits. Next slide. Part of the final year course is a term or 2 terms spent doing a research project, which could involve technical study of a painting. There's a former student here looking at paintings by Cézanne. There are a whole range of topics that can be studied, and it's pretty much tailored to the interests of students and what staff and students can do together. There are different sorts of projects that could involve theoretical ideas of what pattern there is on a painting, or it could look at, for example, the application of a new scientific technique to study paintings, and as well as technical studies of paintings themselves and other interesting topics that could be even cutting edge in the profession and publishable. Next slide. And part of that role that the students take is to present their work at the annual Jerry Headley Student Conference. And this is just a slide from this year's conference, which unusually was an online conference, but very, very successful, where students who did their research work actually presented it in a conference. And normally this would be in real time in a real conference, but this year it was online, and you can actually see this. There's a link below. Next slide. And one of the important part of the final year and the second year of the course is that we get a chance to travel either abroad or stay in the UK and see conservation work in progress in different places. So we get a sense of how it's done, not just here, but in other places. And I just wanted to show you some examples of photos from study trips that we've taken. Next slide. So we've been, I listed the places that we've been that I could remember, but there are some not on the list here. We've been to Berlin, Munich, Madrid, Copenhagen, Vienna, the Netherlands, Belgium, Lisbon, New York even, 1 year, and Prague and other places where we can see all kinds of conservation work and listen to how people deal with local conditions and have their own ways of looking at how conservation should be done. Next slide. Part of being at the Courtauld is also a community. There's a social life, and there's also a fantastic welfare support. I've just shown a couple of slides of the parties that we sometimes have, which are very creative. We don't always have them, but we've had costume parties on different themes. And there's a great sense of teamwork and friendship in the group at the Courtauld. In conservation, certainly in the Easel paintings half, there are 15 students, quite a few students and a few PhD students, and then the wall paintings will also have a cohort, and that is one sort of group of people, but there's also the art history students and the whole art history faculty, which is in the same building. Next slide. And not to say that one of the special things about the course is, of course, it's in London. This brings me back to where we are in King's Cross, which is a very happening place. There's lots of bars and restaurants when they're open. They're excellent to go to. It's a hub for transport. And of course, there are incredible museums and galleries, libraries and other resources that you can draw on very easily in the city. So that's a very brief introduction. And now I want to hand over to my colleague Pippa Bausch, who'll talk about a special element of the first year course.
Thank you. So I'm going to tell you a bit about what's going on at this moment in the autumn term of the first year. And for most of the term, alongside their lectures, our first year students undertake a 7 or 8 week course making replicas of paintings selected from the Courtauld Gallery collections. And this slide shows 3 of these replicas, one on the easel, which is a copy being made of one of our 16th century Italian paintings, and another, a student trying her hand at an impressionist sketch on the banks of the Thames near our Somerset House campus. And then in the lower left, a replica of an early 16th century Northern European painting, Antwerp painting. And so we're very fortunate to be able to draw upon the Courtauld Gallery collection so that we can work actually directly from the paintings from that collection. Next slide, please. Usually, I mean, in every case, every year, the first year students bond over this exercise and get to know each other in the studios. And this year, we've actually managed to create a large enough space that all 5 of our first year students can work in a socially distanced way in a single studio space, which has been absolutely fantastic. So here are 4 of them working in a very calm way at their workbenches. In this big studio space. So it's worked very well. Next slide, please. And this is the first painting that our first years are copying. It's a picture of St. Lawrence by the master of the Fog Pietà, active in the first half of the 14th century. And it's from the Courtauld Gallery, as all the paintings we copy are. And it's painted in egg tempera on poplar panel. And here we have in the centre there, we have Jack, who has just finished smoothing his gesso on the poplar panels that we're using. And he's done his underdrawing, which you can't quite make out. He's done some pouncing. So he's made a cartoon and started his underdrawing by doing some pouncing on that panel. And then Kyoko is depicted here with undertaking the next step, which is to apply the red clay bowl layer for the gilded passages of the panel. Next slide, please. And then this was last week. Last week was gilding week, and the students were able to apply gold to that bowl layer which they'd polished previously. And this is where they discovered how well they prepared their panels. So every single little dint and imperfection shows up by this gold layer, which is then polished and burnished so that it really reflects the light. Next slide, please. And here is a detail of St. Lawrence with his halo and the punch work that the original painting has. And on the right, Lily is replicating that punch work. And what's very interesting is imagining through making these replicas how the painting might have once looked when it first left the easel. So something very prominent in the St. Lawrence painting is this very marked crack pattern, very black cracks and slightly cupped paint and gesso, which of course in our replicas don't exist. So our replicas are flat and perfect and shiny. Next slide, please. Just to say that this is not just a practical exercise, there are all sorts of other aspects to it. So in the case of St. Lawrence and all the paintings we copied, there's always a body of technical imaging and sampling and reports written on these paintings that enable us to learn how to interpret these images. And here is St. Lawrence surrounded by top right, the X-ray of the panel, bottom right, the infrared photograph of the panel, and bottom left, a tiny paint sample made into a cross-section, this time of the blue drapery, so that we can see the pigments that are present in the panel. And all of this information is amalgamated and informs how the students undertake their copies. So it's much more than simply a practical exercise. And alongside the studio work and looking at these images and all this information and looking at the painting itself under the microscope, the students at the same time have a lecture course in the history of materials and techniques. And then once we fit, we're now also embarking on the copying of the 16th century canvas painting that I showed you earlier, and the early northern panel. And the impressionist sketch will be the very last thing that we do. And that's it from me, from the first year studio this term.
Hi, I'm Pia, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what happens in the second year. The second year is a time when you will spend about 70% of your time in the studios, and it's also a time when a lot of what you've been taught in formal lectures and seminars in the first year then comes to bear on your practical works. It's a time when you learn more how certain things that you've known in theory then inform your practice, and that's that kind of refers to any of the technical analysis that you've learned to do and what that tells you about what might be going on in your painting. But it also applies to certain manual skills that you develop more in the second year. And so generally speaking, every student over the course of the entire 3 years works on, say, between 4 and 7 paintings on average. And every student, we aim to have a wide experience, in the sense that you will be given paintings from different periods with different problems, and so the various seminars that you've attended on, for example, adhesives and consolidants, or optics, color theory, mechanical properties of supports, retouching, cleaning. There's a huge range of sort of bits and pieces that you will then bring to your treatments. And it's also a little bit of a moment of truth. You're never alone in making these decisions, but learning how to make decisions based on, for example, arguing for pros and cons, and learning more and more how to evaluate them is a big part of what happens in the second year. As Aviva said, and maybe we can go to the next slide, Claire. As Aviva said, the second year is also a time when you visit studios, primarily studios where some conservation science is being practiced. So I think very often students go to the National Gallery, to Tate, to the Natural History Museum, places like that. But the second year is also a time when you learn more about modern and contemporary paintings, which generally speaking are not a focus of the 3 years that you study at the Courtauld, but are certainly a subject that we introduce you to, and that you can then develop further if you have a particular interest in that. And Maureen and I generally deliver the teaching in that particular strand, and that also includes a studio visit and a variety of lectures being delivered by practitioners in our field. The second year is also a time when students can engage in something called painting pairs, and I'm showing you 2 examples of reports that were written up last year by these painting pairs. So the project is basically a 5 to 6 month long research project where our 5 second year students are paired with MA or PhD art history students from the Courtauld, and the pair then spends several months researching from both a technical and a historical point of view a particular painting that they're given. And the idea is that the combined research makes for a more comprehensive and informed insight into what the painting is. Sometimes we don't even know who the painter is or where the painting comes from. And the idea is also for the art history students to learn more about technical analysis, and for our conservation students to be more introduced to art historical methodology and archival research and whatever other aspects of the research your project asks you to do. It's something that the students always enjoy very much, and it also comprises 2 presentations, which for obvious reasons are currently online, but normally happen in the research forum, and both the Courtauld Gallery and the research forum are partners in this project with us. Claire, you teach also at the moment with me in the second year. Bobo, do you have anything to add? Did I miss anything?
I think Pia covered everything very well. But just to say, yeah, the second year is a really great chance to engage in all these projects where you can collaborate with others, and also just a great chance to get loads of practical work done and really enjoy being in the studio. So it's a really busy year. It's really exciting. I think it's because you're kind of really cracking on with the work of being a conservator. So it's really exciting. But I think I don't have lots to add, so maybe I should hand over now to Maureen, who's going to talk a bit about some third year student treatment project.
Okay, am I unmuted? Yes. Okay, sorry about that earlier. I'm Maureen. We had a little technical glitch where I couldn't be unmuted, but I'm Maureen Cross, another one of the lecturers in the department. As you've heard from my colleagues, we move through the years with increasing amounts of time that you spend in the studio doing practical work. And we also move forward with greater autonomy in decision making. So we expect the students to undertake the technical and contextual study of their paintings and bring that to the decision-making process. We have something that we call regular rounds, which each of the year groups, we undertake this with each of the year groups, where we meet with them at least once a week, and we talk about their progress, and we talk about what decisions they've come to. Pia talked about setting up pros and cons lists, really understanding what it is that the painting needs and what one might do to move forward in a treatment. And we have the students present them, and by the final year, we really want them to be leading their projects, of course, with the guidance of us along the way. The third year, as I said, is a time where you have a lot more time in the studio, but you begin the year with a 10-week research project. It's a 10,000 word research project, and it can be on any subject that you'd like. It might be a material study. You might look at gap filling for panel paintings, or you might look at a specific artist like Aviva showed earlier, Gabriella, who was looking at a specific series of work by Cézanne. So it's led by student interests, and we just try to facilitate what the students would like to undertake. And it's a really nice opportunity to do some in-depth research. And as we said, it's 1 term long, and they produce the thesis project at the end of it. I was just going to show you now 2 projects that are currently going on in the studio, and give you a kind of idea of some of the things that the students undertake. Our paintings come from both the Courtauld Gallery. Aviva said earlier, we are the conservation department for the Courtauld Gallery, but we also have paintings from English Heritage, National Trust, lots of historic homes, societies that may not have their own conservation department, or we might get paintings from, for instance, we've been working on a huge series of 18th century military portraiture from the Royal Collection, which have a historic significance to them, but they're such a busy schedule, they don't have time to treat these works. So we sort of fill a gap there for them. The students are working on, we often get asked this question, but the students are working on real paintings the entire time. So you're seeing on the screen now an interesting panel painting by an unknown Flemish artist from the 17th century. And if you can see in the middle black and white image is an infrared photograph, and you see a strange sweeping cut cutting through the painting in the top right corner. I don't know if I can, no, I guess I can't use my pointer. And, oh yeah, there you go. This isn't a typical way that a panel is joined, and it led to some very interesting research that the student undertook. And as you can see in the final image on the far right is an X-radiograph, and it shows a decorative scheme on the other side of the panel, as well as seeing through the panel. And as it transpired throughout the research that this panel painting, which is now seen as a panel painting, was once in a previous life a decorative lid to a harpsichord. And so it's been a fascinating project that in the 19th century, the addition, which is the sweeping cut that you see, finishes the missing bit of the harpsichord lid and transforms it then into a panel painting. So it's been a really fun project. This work belongs to a private collection. And it's gone through two students. One student did the first initial structural work on the panel to stabilize it. And now we have another student who's doing what we call the aesthetic work, filling in losses and then retouching any wear or damages. Okay, the next slide. This is another fun project that's come into the studio. We, throughout the years, had been treating what was a series of 7 virtues. They were paintings that initially were bequeathed to the Bodleian Library in Oxford and now belong to the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford. And if you can see in the lower right corner, there are 6 of the virtues that we had treated, and the Ashmolean could not find the final virtue, which was hope. So we always had a laugh in the studio about hope being lost. But hope is not lost, even in these tough times of COVID-19. We have found hope. And hope was rolled and mislabeled as a woman with a bird. It was a really exciting project because we had gone through and treated in the studio one by one the other 6. So now we have unrolled the painting and allowed it to relax. And it had been lined, and you can see in the lower left corner some of the process of taking off the old lining canvas that was really not supporting the painting anymore. And then temporarily mending the tear so that the painting could be stretched. And that's the stage we're at now, where the painting is stretched. The student's considering what structural work to undertake. Pia told you earlier that there's a variety of projects that each student does. And one of the things that we try to do is have every student do some sort of structural work, be it the panel work or the canvas work, and each of the students does a cleaning, and we try to give a variety of projects and different types of paintings to each of the students. So you'll have a good variety of work. And what you don't do yourself, you'll be working in a year group and you can collaborate and discuss amongst yourselves and gain experience that way. Okay, I think that's all I had to say about what's going on in the studio now. I think we'll run the student videos now.
Hiya, my name is Megan and I'm a first year postgrad student at the Courtauld studying easel paintings conservation, and I'm just going to speak to you a little bit about how I actually got into conservation. So at secondary school my favourite subjects were art and history, and I'd never really heard of art history as a discipline or knew anything about it, apart from that Monet was an impressionist or that Da Vinci painted a really long time ago. However, in the summer of year 11, I applied for a summer school at the University of Cambridge via the Sutton Trust, and this was designed to offer new subjects to kids in state schools that had never had a chance or even knew about some of these kind of new things, and I chose to study art history for a week. I was immediately hooked, and I remember having a talk about Jan van Eyck's Arnolfini portrait and how all the individual elements had a really specific meaning. It was after this that I decided to study art history at university. So I chose to go to Birmingham because the art history department was really unique and was actually based inside the uni's own gallery, the Barber Institute of Fine Arts. We had our seminars upstairs, and amongst the artworks, which included a Botticelli, Bruegel the Younger, a Manet, Rossetti, a Van Gogh, and many more. They just had like one of everything to make a really nice kind of journey of art history. So to me, art history is a study of artworks in the context their specific historical, political, social and material situations. For example, looking at how the USSR posters and propaganda took on meaning in the different countries occupied by them during the Cold War. So art historians study how current issues like gender, race, sexuality and many more have been defined by, guided by and expressed in art forms. For example, when we look to Renaissance paintings of Venus, we can see how the expectations for women to look a certain way has been a centuries-long problem. And when we look to the work created in Weimar Germany after World War I, we can see how artists depicting homosexuality, gender fluidity and self-expression were being constantly challenged and suppressed like they are now. Art history also looks at contemporary art and celebrates how artists break down more and more stereotypes every day in quite weird and wonderful ways. So whilst I really love learning about all of these things, I was always more interested in the specific material and historical circumstances of the paintings. I wanted to know what techniques were used, why artists painted in certain styles, and more about the objects themselves. So we studied snippets of ethics in my degree, and I remember having a discussion with my tutor about what makes a painting authentic. For example, is it knowing that a specific artist created it or that it's never been restored? So I went on to discuss the ethics of conservation and how restoration can affect the originality and authenticity of a painting in my final year dissertation. So I kind of looked into how treatments like cleaning or retouching can affect our perception of an artwork. So, for example, can a painting still be deemed original if you know that 20% of it has been retouched or overpainted? Or does knowing that it's been lined and it's no longer on its original support make it inauthentic? It was after this project and after many hours of discussion with my personal tutor that I finally decided to apply to the Courtauld to study conservation. So in preparation for applying and interviewing, I started changing the way I viewed art and focused more on the material aspects of a painting in an exhibition, rather than the subject matter as much. So I read lots of online resources like the National Gallery Technical Bulletin, and I organised visits to both private and public conservation studios and museums, including the National Gallery itself. I wanted to understand what a conservator is responsible for and what their day-to-day life looks like before I chose to go into my future career. And I'm so glad that I did that, and that's why I'm here today. Thank you.
That's now the end of our slides. But just to say that we have, that was Megan, but we have 3 more of those little how I got